Great.
It's all yours.
Thanks so much. Really, it's so great to be with all of you today. And what we're going to talk about ultimately is how to figure out what's next. And I'll share a lot more about my journey and also the research that underpins now what I do. I'm the CEO of a company called Vocation, and it's an AI career coach that takes all of this research, which we'll talk about, and helps give you guidance and support and resources and structure to help you navigate your own journey. And so, as somebody who has been through ups and downs in a career and also navigated some interesting transitions, which I'll share a bit about. I would love to share these ideas with you. And if you have questions, please throw them in the chat. I'll have time at the end for questions as well. But if we can just incorporate a dialogue as we go, would happily do that together. So really quick on just who is this for? A lot of you are here, maybe you're just curious, but really, what did we build Vocation for, and what was the research designed to help people do? And I would just give a couple of bullets here just to help frame, where this best lands and who this will be most helpful for. First person is, you're trying to figure out what's next, but you're really worried you're going to make the wrong choice. Often people have a couple of clear options in mind, or they maybe have an offer on the table, or they're thinking about a few options. But you've had a really bad experience. You've been in the wrong fit, or you've been in an environment where you're just like, oh, I can't do that again. So you're really worried you don't want to screw it up, right? It's as much about getting it right and also not getting it wrong. And so that could be you. You could also be somebody who maybe doesn't really have a clear direction, right? You're kind of stuck in your head and your emotions, and you just can't see any path forward. You might be saying things like, I'm not good at anything, or I don't have any specific skills. Obviously a generalist, right? Which I am. You kind of lose your sense of identity of what you're capable of. And then you're thinking things like, well, maybe I should just go back to school, right? And that's at least going to open up a door for me because I can't figure out any path. So I'll just do the grad school thing or whatever it is. This could be helpful in that situation. More generally, if you're just really struggling to articulate what you want and what you're good at and really what you're trying to accomplish, a friend or your partner or someone asks you, like, oh, what are you looking for? And it's like, well, I'm not really sure. And you just haven't really found your voice yet and what you're trying to articulate. And what I would say is what this is not for anyone that came here thinking that this is going to be like a resume, like tips and tricks or like a LinkedIn hacking, like that is not me. That's not what we do. And it's not what our expertise is. So we'll talk a little bit about some things that can be helpful, but this is more about navigation and direction, and how to figure out where you're trying to go rather than how to hack the resume to, get the interview or something like that. So that's just a little bit of level setting, which hopefully is helpful. Um, and then just an introduction to me. So I mentioned I've done a lot of things in my career. So I don't have a linear path at all. I started out in electrical engineering, studying computer architecture, and my first job out of college was designing computer chips. It's like the most technical and dorky job you could imagine, right? And I did that for a handful of reasons, but like many people who get into college and I got married young and like started to have responsibility, it just felt like I'm just going to do the thing that my parents did, which is what my dad did. But I really loved teaching, and I was teaching in a lot of environments. I was tutoring, and I was thinking a lot about the future of education and online learning and these types of things about 15 years ago. And so I didn't know what to do. Again, went to grad school thinking that would do some things, which it did and it did. And I never actually finished this educational policy degree, but it did allow me to demonstrate at least enough conviction to convince a think tank in the education sector to let me come work for them. So I left engineering. I went and joined an education think tank, was a research assistant, and then a product manager building tools for educators, making half as much money as I did as an engineer, but was really happy and was really doing a lot of interesting things. Led to another opportunity. That think tank was run by a professor at Harvard Business School named Clayton Christensen, who since passed away, but he was one of the foremost management and innovation thinkers, and he asked me to be his chief of staff. And I had no clue what that was or what that meant and if I had the skills to do it, but it felt like a good opportunity. So I went and did that. And that turned into business school. And then I had a passion for and interest in startups and venture capital. And so I joined a venture capital fund investing in really, really hard science, like deep tech and companies in AI and robotics. And that was a little bit too technical, a bit too narrow. And so then I joined a generalist fund, and that wasn't really working out. And now I started a company, right? And so what I would say is that this journey is winding primarily because traditional career advice just doesn't really work, and it certainly never worked for me, right? So these are common things that you've probably heard or that you think about when you think about figuring out your next job move or your next step. Like just stick it out, wait a little bit longer, you'll get promoted, or just follow your old boss. You trusted her, and so just follow her coattails and keep doing what she's doing. Or just keep applying to lots of things. Eventually something will pan out. It's just a numbers game. Or go back to school. Again, I did that, right? Or don't settle for a salary increase. I didn't do that. Like I've taken pay cuts multiple times. Or the assumption that like because somebody else did something and it worked out for them, or because their path looked a certain way, it's going to look a certain way for you. And that just isn't, that's just not the reality, right? It's not how people's careers are. It's not how experience happens. And so I would just disabuse you of the notion that like traditional career advice is really helpful. And particularly for a population of generalists, it's very much not helpful, and it never was for someone like myself. So instead, here are the principles that have guided me, and we're going to
Cliff,
dive into this a bit more. Yes,
Cliff,
Millie, go ahead.
I'm not sure if you're meant to be sharing your slides at this point, but we can't see them.
Oh no, let's do this.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, yeah, you're good. Okay, you heard a story though, at least. So there you go. Let's see. Can you
Yeah.
see slides now?
Yeah, you're good.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, this is who this is for. I'll just leave it here for a minute in case a visual learner wants to read what I said. And trying to help you figure out what's next. This was my journey. Um, Super windy, and this is the traditional career advice, which we talked a bit about, which just does not work in that world. So what has guided me, and why I felt drawn and compelled to build Vocation and do the work that we do is just a couple of things. The first is that your resume does not have to make sense. Like my resume literally makes sense to nobody. It is not a straight line in any direction, and that's okay because I have moved in a way that helped me make progress, which we'll talk a lot more about. I've not been motivated by progression, like, manager, director, VP, like that. That's a very old school mentality about how careers need to look and feel. And I have taken just a completely separate approach to be oriented around what's going to help me move forward in the way that I need to move forward in my context, which we'll talk about. Networks do matter, relationships do matter. That is maybe a work cliche, but the reality is that like something like 50 to 85% of jobs are secured via networks. If you looked at my story and I told you the people that I met along the way that opened up those certain doors, like those actually do matter. So that's just kind of a truism across the board. But a lot of things that we hear when we coach individuals um, in the career spaces, they get so nervous that if they go down a certain path, doors are going to close. And that may be true, but you need to realize that many other doors will open, right? Like, did I go down a path that closed engineering to me? Probably forever. Yeah. What doors opened? Like, I met an entire academic community at Harvard Business School that opened up all sorts of, new ideas, new networks, new job opportunities. So don't be so afraid that you're closing something because you're always going to be opening something new. There's no single path. It's not a zero-sum game. Careers are very diverse and they're very long. So you should be willing to be more flexible. So what we'll do is I'll just talk a bit more about kind of the research that guides our approach to helping people navigate this process, and then we'll talk through that process itself. But I want to give you the research and the academic underpinnings, and then the actual kind of tactical work that we do to help people. So these are my collaborators and mentors. I mentioned Clay Christensen, who I worked with at Harvard Business School, and his colleagues, who are now my co-founders, Bob Mesta and Michael Horn, who are the other two individuals on the screen below Clay. Large, thinkers have written several books, have been at the intersection of future of work and product and innovation. And for the past decade, Bob and Michael, and then for the past few years when I got involved, have been taking all of the core ideas about innovation and product discovery and product innovation and applied it to people and set out to figure out what causes people to change jobs. What is the actual progress that they're seeking at the time that they decide to switch? And can we build a process that can help people more predictably make the progress that they're actually seeking? And because what you find is a lot of people change jobs and they regret it, right? And if you looked at the Great Resignation when COVID happened and like 100 million people left their jobs and changed jobs, What was studied is that 75% of people regretted their job change. And so the process and the research interviewing over 1,000 people was to figure out how can we help people not regret their choice, but actually make the right choice against the progress that they're seeking. And so that research was published in a book called Job Moves. It was published late 2024. And I got involved with that, I mentioned a few years ago, and I approached Bob and Michael and said, look, this is great. This has helped me. It's helped a lot of people. Let's build a product around it. And so that's what Vocation was born out of, which we can talk a bit more about. But some of the high level framings in terms of how we think about progress and how we think about decisions and how people actually make choices, kind of broadly, and then we'll talk more narrowly about careers. The first thing I would say is that people are motivated by outcomes and not by products or features or services. So people don't actually want a quarter-inch drill. They want a quarter-inch hole. This is a quote from Ted Levitt, who was a professor at Harvard many years ago. And if you take that extension further, people don't actually want quarter-inch holes. They want to hang up a light so they can have light to read, let's say, at night or over their bed or something. And so when you really dig into the decisions people make, you get closer and closer to the actual progress that they were seeking and the choices and the decisions they made along the way to get that progress. And so it's all oriented around outcomes. But the second thing to keep in mind when you're making a decision is context matters a great deal. Like if I asked you which one's better, right? Which is better, this like juicy steak dinner or a pizza? You might say both. Like these are both fantastic options. I would love either of those right now because I'm hungry. But when you think of steak dinner, you think like a luxury meal. You think like a night out, maybe with your partner, or you're celebrating an event, anniversary or something. And you think pizza, you think picnic at the park with family, with friends, right? Something more informal. The context of your that you're in matters and determines the outcome that you're seeking and what progress means in that context, right? And so sometimes context isn't that important, but sometimes it's incredibly important. And in the case of careers, context matters a great deal. And so part of the process is figuring out what context am I in so I can start to figure out what the solution set actually looks like because there's lots of options, right, depending on my context. And the last piece I would say in terms of just how we think about decision framing, right, and what progress means is that sometimes we bucket things in terms of categories or we use this in product, but we also think about it in terms of like careers or industries or things like that. We kind of bucket things together that actually are not the same. So if I show you a Snickers bar and a Milky Way bar, you think chocolate, you think candy aisle, you think like a $1.50 or whatever, right? They kind of equate to the same thing. They're in the same aisle at the store. But my colleague Bob Mesta actually worked with Snickers many years ago and to understand like what's actually happening when people buy this product versus the other one. And when you look at a Snickers purchase, what typically happens is somebody is grabbing a Snickers at the last thing they buy before they hop on a plane and get to work on their laptop. It's all about like I need a quick hit of energy. I need a little bit more full stomach to feel like I've got the capacity to get some work done and have focus. You look at people who buy Milky Ways, and it's like it's at night and they're in their blanket and they're watching their movie and they're slowly eating their Milky Way. And it's a luxurious thing. It's like a glass of wine, right? And so you realize that like Snickers and Milky Way don't actually compete with each other at all. They're not even in the same category. Snickers competes with, energy bars or coffee or energy drinks. And Milky Way competes with ice cream or a glass of wine or something to wind down at the end of a long day, right? And so the reality is that when you can separate categories, you can see more clearly, again, what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so all this to say that the core idea that animates our research and how we help people make decisions is what we call a job to be done. And the job to be done in any moment is the progress that you're seeking in a struggling circumstance. And so just to pause here for a minute, like this little example of this picture, right? Somebody's at a chasm and they need to cross the chasm. The first thing I would say is that what is the struggling circumstances? Why does this person feel compelled to make the leap? One thing I would say is that sometimes that we get to the precipice and we feel like we need to make a jump, but we don't do anything. And the reality is that like your struggle is not that bad. And so when it comes to making decisions and actually doing something about your situation, what we say in our world, this is again a quote from my co-founder, is bitching ain't switching, right? Like you can have problems, but if they're not serious enough, you're not going to do anything about it. And then the other thing is, again, like when you understand the context and the struggling moment, you can think of all sorts of ways to get the progress that you're seeking. Like in this example, I could build a bridge, I could build a tunnel, I could take a helicopter, I could take a plane, I could do all sorts of things. But it all depends on my context, how much, and do I have money? Do I have time? Like, am I at risk? Like, what is the actual progress this person in this, you made up scenario is seeking based on their circumstances? And so the reality is that when you look at the decisions that people make, they don't just buy products like on a lark or because it tastes good or like they do it to hire
What do you
they hire the product to get a job done in their life. And so that's the framing of
Sorry, sorry. I was just muting as someone was talking. There you go. You should be able to. Is that good for you, Cliff?
can you guys hear me now? Okay,
Yeah, go for it.
perfect. So we hire products to get jobs done in our life, and careers are no different. And so the research, again, interviewing over 1,000 people, was to figure out what are people hiring ultimately when they make a change at work? Like, what is their job to be done? And so that's the core framing that we took to this problem. Let's see, this is my slide. Not going. Yeah. So again, why do people ultimately end up changing jobs? They hired their new job to make progress in their life. And part of what we're trying to help you do is to figure out what does progress mean for you so that you can make the right choice rather than make a choice and then 6 months later realize this isn't what I signed up for, or I really don't like this, or ultimately regret and be disengaged at work. So the timeline for how we think about jobs to be done, we don't have to spend a lot of time here, but things are fine until they're not, right? So like maybe there's some friction that causes you to first notice something that you need differently. So, your car has some oil leaks. Now you're noticing, nice cars on the freeway and you're like, oh, that'd be nice. Maybe I should get a new car. And then now you're passively looking and then something happens more seriously, right? That causes you to now actually go to dealerships or research products or cars online. Like you're now actively looking. And then ultimately there's another event that just cements or kind of lets you know that this needs to change, right? And so then you're actually going to go and make the purchase. And then you look back and you wonder and you hope that the thing that you purchased is going to give you the satisfaction that you were seeking. And so the whole point of understanding your timeline and understanding your job to be done is so that you can look back and realize I am completely satisfied with this choice. This was exactly what I was looking for. And so last thing here before we then get more granular about what this means for careers is there's multiple forces acting on somebody at any given moment, right? We call these the forces of progress. On the top line here, these are the forces that are prompting you to make a change, what we call pushes and pulls. Pushes are things that are negative forces, they're frictions, they're frustrations, they're things that you're trying to overcome. And as they pile up, you start to realize I need to do something about this. And pulls are things that you're drawn to, things that you're the outcomes that you're seeking. And they might be fuzzy at first, but as they get more into focus, then you have this idea of like what's possible, and then you want to make a choice. But there's also forces that hold us back, things that keep us from making change. One of which is anxiety. We just use the larger term anxiety to say, when you're making a change, small or big, it's like, is it going to work? What is my partner going to think? How do I know it's going to work a month from now? Or like, is this going to give me the good, return for my investment? You have all these worries and anxieties that prevent you from making a choice. And then you have habits. You have things that they might not be perfect, but they're good enough, and you kind of put up with things, and it's not really that bad yet. So again, push and pull has to be stronger than the anxiety and the habits, or you're never actually going to do something about it. Again, this like notion bitching and switching, right? Like there has to be enough of a struggle and enough of a pull for you to feel like you're going to go do something about your situation. So these are common pushes and pulls that came up when we interviewed people who are at a moment of changing jobs and thinking about what's next. And we don't have to read through all of them. I'll just read a few, right? So these are some pushes that come up frequently when we talk to job changers. I don't respect the people I work with. Feels like the work has no impact anymore in my life or the company or the world. Like it's just meaningless. Or the way I'm managed is wearing me down. or maybe the company is struggling and had some layoffs and I'm worried that like the end is near. And so on the pull side, you have things like I want to spend more time outside of work, right? Or maybe I'm sacrificing too much of personal time, so I need more. Or I'm looking for a place where my values and beliefs just better align with the company. Maybe the company's priorities have shifted and you're noticing that like I just don't really believe in this anymore and you're looking for something there. Or maybe you just need to be acknowledged and respected to do good work. Maybe no one's given you the reins in a long time, and you're like, just I want a place where I can really just do the work I know I can do well, right? And so the reason I put these up here is because as you think about your own situation and you're thinking about navigating your own, potential career move, if these pushes and pulls, if these don't really feel strong or resonant with you, it might mean that you're in an okay spot. Or maybe there's a couple here and a couple there, but like it's okay. What we found in our research was that when the pushes piled up, when there's like four or more clear and obvious pushes, that usually meant like that's enough, friction that you're going to end up doing something. And so it's important just to understand what yours are, and we'll talk a bit about what that means so that you can then kind of scope the potential solution. So I mentioned that all this research, was published in Job Moves. We built a product called Vocation that is an AI-driven conversational platform that helps you go through these steps and go through this process on your own time and have coaching and support, all research-driven. I just wanted a quick plug here before we then talk about the specific process is that, anyone here can put in the code Generalist and get a discount right on this lifetime access of coaching and support as you navigate this journey. And so what I'll do now is talk through each of these steps and then help you have a framework for which you can think about as you're trying to navigate what's next. Here we go. Oh, I guess before we continue, I'm seeing something here in the chat. Is there any questions or we just keep going?
Up to you. We have a couple of questions, if you wanted to
Yeah.
blast through them, or okay, cool. I think that'd be
Yeah,
cool.
we can take a quick pause and then we'll go through the process. I'm
Awesome.
looking at one here that says, what about do you want to do it, Millie? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I've got them noted for you just to make it easy because the chat's been lovely and active. So let's start from the how do you switch from passive looking to active looking when you don't know what you're looking for or you're passionate about various distinct areas?
Yeah, so passive and active looking is just a framework for, and I'll go back to that slide here. It's a way to understand, like, when we say passive, what we mean is like there's some frustration that you're experiencing and there's some outcome you're thinking about, but it's not severe enough that you're actually like trying to think about making a choice. So maybe it's like again this car example, like you had some car trouble. So now you saw this like nice car in the freeway. Now you see that car everywhere and you're like, oh man, that car is everywhere. And you're starting to notice things you haven't noticed before. Or, maybe you're just kind of like talking to friends, or maybe it's coming up more in conversation because it's somewhat on your mind. Active looking is all about like, I've got to make a choice here, right? It's building up enough that I'm now looking for a solution. I'm weighing options, I'm making trade-offs. And so um, not knowing what you want just is fine. And what that just means is that I would anchor first in like what is your current context and what are the pushes and pulls acting on you right now? Because that's going to inform like whether I need to actually start to think about figuring out what I want versus like it's just like still a question I have and it's not really that significant enough yet.
Mm. I think that's helpful. And if there's any follow-up questions, feel free to ask them in the chat and we can come back to them at the end. The next question I think is important, and that is, what about for those of us who are unemployed, especially for those coming back from extended time away, it's another level of anxiety.
Yeah, for sure. So I have what I would say is that have been in that situation, right? Have been laid off multiple times, have been unemployed, and excuse me, I think that in that scenario, it's less about push, right? Because there may be some push, like there may be now some time constraints or some relational aspects that you're trying to think through, right, in terms of finding employment. But it's more about um, really thinking through your pulls, right? And figuring out like, okay, if I took a job tomorrow, like what are the non-negotiables? What are the things that I need to be true? And how does that reflect the actual progress that I'm looking for? Ultimately, like every situation is different. So like if you need a job just to pay the bills, like that's progress, right? And so you don't have to be picky because that's what progress is. Like that's maybe the push that is overweighing any of the pulls. But if you're in a position of I can have some time, right? I have maybe more severance or more flexibility to think through this, then it's less about I would think through like your last situation and what was really pushing on you then, and then think through again the pulls that you're attracted toward to and that you're trying to accomplish. But we'll talk a lot more about kind of what that looks like as we go through it.
Okay. And one last question, which might just be a quick one, is in the survey of 1,000 people who switched jobs in which 75% regretted it, how long after the job switch were they surveyed? Because this person has heard studies, other studies have shown that people tend to be happier as a result of making any change in their life as time passes.
Yeah, so that data point was looking specifically at like the Great Resignation. So like the post-COVID like massive job change. I think it was a Gallup survey, right, of engagement and like regret. Like after I think 100 million people in the US is almost a billion people globally had changed work. Our research was motivated more at the moment of somebody had just very recently, within the last few months, made a job change, or was actively like, I'm on my way out, I'm looking or I'm applying, right? So that's where we approached people in our research. But the point is that uh, if you're not if you're like me, right, you have made a decision in your career that you realize like this wasn't exactly what I was looking for, or I thought that this would be what was going to happen, but I realize I'm not happy in this environment, or whatever it may be. And you didn't know that up front, but you figure that out. And the whole point of what we're trying to do is rather than learn by switching, right, figuring it out on the job, learn before you switch, right? Let's figure out what your priorities are before we make that switch so that you can be more confident as you make that choice.
Thanks, Cliff. Let's keep going. And thank you for all the questions in the chat and also the commentary in the chat. I'll continue to take notes and we can have more questions
Yeah.
at the end.
So just talking through the actual process now that we help people go through when they're thinking, trying to navigate a change, which is the first step is what we call discovering your career quest. We use the word quest only because most people who get introduced to us don't have the research understanding that you now do. But this is ultimately like, what is your job to be done? Like, why are you even thinking about a change? Right? Let's just understand your context. Like, what happened over the last few weeks or months that's caused you to say, I think I need something different? Let's understand then what are the pushes acting on you right now? And what are the pulls that you're drawn towards right now? And tell me why. And give us a bit more clarity on what's actually happening in your context. Again, this notion of like the Snickers versus the Milky Way, like there's different outcomes for different contexts. And we need to understand it so that we can have now like a direction on the map, so to speak, before it's just like a complete open canvas. Now we actually have some focus. The other reason that we have to start with understanding your quest is because oftentimes, and this came through a lot as we were building the process and coaching people as part of the research, oftentimes when you really dig into the current context, what people articulate is that like their pushes and pulls aren't as extreme as they thought. Or you realize, like, what if you could ask your manager this one thing, or they could tweak this one thing about your work? Would that be sufficient? Like, if we could remove just this one push and add this one pull, like, would that be, would your current environment be sustainable and productive? And the answer is actually, yeah. And so often you don't need to make a change, right? If you can be more clear about what you're trying to accomplish and whether, again, every workplace is different. That might not be, there might not be flexibility or whatever your environment is, but sometimes you can just approach your company with a very authentic expression of what you're looking for. Tweaks can be made, and you can stay in your environment and make progress in your current role rather than switching. But it all starts with understanding you and your own job to be done in your own context. Um, so, what are the quests for progress that we see in our research, right? So, as we interviewed, um, over 1,000 people to understand what their job to be done was, there were four core quests that emerged that gave us a lot more clarity and focus and helped people and kind of identify where they were on their journey. And different quests result in different types of outcomes. And so I'll walk through the four really quickly here. And hopefully some of these resonate with any of you that's thinking about a change. You're probably in one of or a combination of one of these four buckets. The first quest for progress is what we call get out. This is when you can't see a way to thrive in your current job, or your manager is wearing you down and the company feels like a dead end, and you just need to escape to a place where you're supported and challenged. This is all about getting out and usually getting out quickly. It's I'm willing to make a ton of trade-offs because anything, frankly, might be better than what I'm currently doing. The risk when you're in get out and you're feeling so much, this is all heavy push, right? You have so many pushes piling up that it's just like, I gotta leave. The risk when you're in a get out phase, often when it may be a toxic environment or just something that's totally unsustainable, and I've been there, is that you make a choice so hastily that you find another job that is just as toxic or like it's marginally better, but like it's a repeat of the same circumstance. And so the advice here is just to recognize that this is where you are so that you can be a bit more thoughtful as you think about what's next. This next quest for progress is all about called regaining control. This is usually somebody who fundamentally likes what they do, at least for the most part, or maybe they love what they do, but it's just they're overwhelmed, right? Work is demanding too much of them, and they need to find a place where they have more say about how they use their time or priorities or how they do their work, right? And so this is usually more in the realm of like work-life balance. So I'm not really looking for like a wholesale change. I just need more control over my time. And this third quest is what we call regain alignment. This is really common in mid-career um, individuals who, you've been at a place for a while, work has shifted, and now you're starting to feel like my experience, my skills, and the things that I feel uniquely capable of doing just aren't valued anymore. And so I'm trying to find an environment where I can be respected and acknowledged and trusted to do good things. And so it usually comes up in a lot of like, if you ask somebody like, tell me about your current environment, there's a lot of like, a lot of criticism, a lot of negativity. It's like, oh, my manager's an idiot. Oh, the company is just making all these bad decisions. You're starting to feel like, I don't really feel respected and seen in this environment. It's just not working. I need a place where it is. And so this might not be a career change, but rather aligning with the things that you feel capable of doing. And then this last quest is all about taking the next step. You hit some personal milestone or a career milestone, and now you're looking for a place to move forward and take on new challenges. And so this is again more pull driven than push driven. It's all about like I want to become something more, or I need to take on more responsibility, or maybe I just had a baby and I got to like level up and provide or whatever it is. And so it's like it's all about taking that next step and being open to challenge and risk rather than the others, which are a bit different. So these aren't what's the phrase like mutually exclusive. Like you might be one in one quest strongly, you might be in a combination of them where everyone's on a spectrum. But the reality is that when you understand your quest, you can then narrow the funnel of opportunity sets that you're looking at as you think about what your next job ought to be. So this next step, once you understand your quest and like your core job to be done, this is something that is not incredibly unique to what we do. It's true of anyone here that's worked with some career counselors or who is in that space, which is to really build an energy profile. Like where are you when you're in a state of flow? Like what's a space that you can be in that you are just like thriving, you lose sense of time, right? And the reason that you do this is because often we focus on features when we think about jobs. You think about titles or pay or benefits or prestige or all these things. But what you need to think more about is the experiences of that job, right? What are you going to fundamentally be doing all day in that role? And does it align with the things that give you energy versus those things that drain your energy? And often this comes up when somebody's feeling like they need to get promoted or become a director or manager or whatever. And it's like, okay, but if you look at what the director does all day, do you enjoy doing those things all day? Like, are you going to actually be sure you'll get paid more? Great. But are you going to be happy when you do those things? It may not be, it may be, but like it's the point is you need to understand what gives you energy and what drains your energy. And you need to get granular about it. And so we might be able to say, like, I enjoy problem solving. It's like, okay, you can solve problems anywhere, but like let's get a bit more specific about the context and the environments. Like I enjoy tackling undefined problems and autonomy when tasked with coming up with solutions. Like, okay, so now we have a bit more structure about the environments that bring out my best. And the reason that you want to build an energy profile is because when we'll talk about this in step 4, but there's lots of opportunities that don't necessarily line up with your resume, but that lean very heavily into those things that give you energy and that lean into your skills. And so again, I switched from one job to another to do very different things, but I was always trying to figure out like what are the aspects of that environment that's going to bring out more of me and help me be the best that I can be, right? And that might look like a completely different sector, and not necessarily a linear jump. And then this third step is really just an extension of building an energy profile. Is to start to take a step back and try to identify themes across your career to figure out where are there recurring energy drivers and recurring energy drainers. And so that allows you to figure out what is an essential aspect of my environment that I need to thrive, and what are things I'm willing to trade off. And so this chart over here on the right is what we do with individuals, both in the product and also in our coaching, is basically look at all of your energy drivers and all your energy drainers and try to cluster them into some buckets, right? So like, intellectually challenging or personal impact or time for hobbies. And then go through your career or the last set all the jobs that you've had and rank them based on how present those energy drivers were or how absent they were. And you start to see that there are certain jobs where you say, like, man, that was my best job ever. And it's like, well, okay, on which dimensions was it your favorite? And you start to identify that there are certain themes that are emerging that when they are present are just dispositive of success and enjoyment and fulfillment on the job versus themes that show up on the not present at all, things that are draining you. And so it gives you an ability to step back and evaluate where it is that you're trying to go. And then I'll just go through this next step, the last two here, and then we can pause again for some questions. But this fourth step, again, this is we approach this question from like the product and innovation space, which is in product world, you talk about divergent prototyping. And so we talked about like the chasm of water at the beginning. Like I could build a bridge, I could build a boat, I could take a plane. There's lots of different ways to get the progress that you're seeking. And so when you're thinking about careers, you need to take a very divergent approach before you start to narrow down on the opportunities you're going to choose. And so the reality is that the job market is really big. There's lots of opportunities, especially for a generalist. And I put the plug here, right, Millie, the generalist world, like job board, right? So there's a lot of interesting roles that you can pursue that might not match your resume at all, right? I went from engineering to education research to, supporting a professor. Like there's all sorts of things that might line up with your energy drivers, your themes, and your quest, and not with your resume per se, right? And so be willing to experiment broadly. And also, as you're leveraging your network to evaluate opportunities you're considering, so maybe you have a friend or a friend of a friend who has a job that you're thinking about, reach out to them, ask them, ask them for coffee or whatever. And the questions aren't, do you like your job? Are you happy? The question is, what do you do all day, right? Walk me through your day, how decisions are made, where are you spending your time? Because you're trying to figure out, do the experiences of this job line up with the things that I'm trying to do with my career? And so the other reason that we do this prototyping exercise and we look at a various range of opportunities intentionally, not tied to your resume, but in a pretty broad sense, is that it allows you to make trade-offs. And so, if you look at two opportunities together and say, okay, this one's going to give me more chances to be a leader and lead people, whereas this one's going to help me, like develop my brand or something. It's like, okay, if you had to pick one, which is it? And if we look at your quest and we look at your energy drivers and we kind of take a step backward, you can realize that I'm willing to do this and let go of this because this is actually more in line with the progress that I'm seeking. And so you can't make trade-offs until you have contrast. And we use this phrase often, which is contrast creates meaning. You have to be able to see different things to make those trade-offs so that you can then be clear about the progress that you're actually trying to get done and in your career. And then this last step really is just now that you've prototyped and you've gotten a few conversations, you met with some people, you figured out some directions that seem to be like a strong fit. Now we just have to then anchor it. Now we can get more narrow. And now you can hold up two roles together or two job opportunities together and really look back on your whole self-discovery process to say, does this actually align with my quest? Does this align with what gives me energy? Is this going to help me avoid all the pushes I'm trying to get away from, give me all the pulls I'm drawn to? And ultimately, which role is going to give me the clearest sense of progress that I'm seeking? So I'll stop here if there's other questions that have emerged, and then just have a few more slides, and then happy to conclude when it makes sense.
Awesome. Yes, we do have a couple more questions. So the first one is, how do you decide as a career pivoter which career to follow? Because you might like like the job description, but you haven't done that work. But on a gut level, you like the job description or the role. Like, how much weightage do you give to gut feelings when deciding on potential careers?
Yeah, so I would say little. Here's what I mean by that. Job descriptions are typically very poorly written. They do not encapsulate what actually happens on the job. They're as much of a legal document as they are a marketing document to try to attract you. But if you ask somebody who does that job, and ideally someone who does that job at that company, if it's a larger company, for instance, you find out that like the actual job is very different than what you thought it was. And so we worked with somebody who was in like the technical writing communication space, and her dream was like to be at National Geographic, right? That was something that she thought. And there was this role, I can't remember the title, but it was like a travel, uh, something related to like the actual travel and logistics of their all the work that National Geographic does. And so the job description was like, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. And then she found somebody through like a friend of a friend and got to connect with someone who worked at Nat Geo and realized that like, oh, it's basically just like a glorified travel agent. That's what the job is. It's like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a travel agent. And so I think that um, I'm not saying don't trust your gut, but what I am saying is that like you need to get ground truth about how jobs actually are, because even two job descriptions that look the same in two different companies, they might manifest very differently based on how that company's operating, what that company's trying to do, their goals, their work streams, et cetera. And so the more information that you can get is always going to be more helpful than just feeling like I'm drawn to product because it seems like what I want to be doing. But it's like, okay, that might be true, but let's get more clear about what you actually do in product or whatever it is that you're thinking about.
Awesome, thank you. And next question, how can you balance the roles you're drawn to versus the ones where you hit all or most of the criteria, particularly tricky to gauge in a saturated market?
Yeah, so I guess is the question, I mean, my sense of the question is like, how do I balance like my own journey versus like the reality of the job market, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that obviously like the job market is real, right? And so a part of the process of going through this work is to say, okay, now that I've gone through this journey of discovering myself and what I'm trying to find and what I need to be successful and be, fulfilled. A, does that job exist? Is it open? Or B, if it's not, or if it's narrow, like are there adjacencies that now are closer to the realm that I'm looking for that I could then go and get? And so I think that all this to say, like, obviously, this process, like, the rubber meets the road in terms of getting something, right? And so, like, what we try to help people realize is like, okay, if the process is like landing on this notion that like, okay, I'm just using this again as an example, like product management is like where I really want to be. It's like, okay, um, is there if it's not really conceivable that where you are right now is going to allow you to get that job, it's like what is the stepping stone then that you need to then get there, right? And so now you can start to architect like the steps that you want to take based on like the actual vision for yourself that you have. And so that's where you kind of have to meet reality with the job market. But everyone's journey and circumstances are ultimately different, right? Like, and I can't pretend to know, how much time you have or money you have or flexibility and all these things. So like we all of us in our own unique ways kind of confronts the job market. But the whole point of doing this type of work is so that at a moment in which you feel like I do need to make a change, like these pushes and pulls are piling up and I'm really looking for something different, you just want to have so much more clarity at the time that you make that choice because um, like the whole point is to not regret a choice that was not optimal.
Awesome. And the next question is, shouldn't you initially try to fix on a title, industry, seniority level, for example, to be more specific during the job search? Or is it more about reading the JD, irrespective of the job title, and then going ahead with that?
Yeah, I would just say that like title by itself or salary don't mean anything in isolation, but they mean something to you in context. Again, what is your context? So like, why does that title feel important to you potentially? Is it because you don't feel respected and acknowledged? Again, this notion of like regain alignment, like is that really what's driving the need for a certain title or a certain pay grade? If so, then the progress that you're seeking is respect, right? And acknowledgement and an environment to really do good work. And so you might get that with a particular title. You might not get that, or you might get that with a job that doesn't offer that title, but is giving you the respect and the acknowledgement and the trust that you're seeking, right? Because the environment is set up correctly. And so um, I wouldn't say like to avoid it. I would just use your reaction to and your like when you see a title or a salary or whatever, and you have immediate thought or feeling about it, you just have to dig into what is that really trying to tell you, right? And what are you actually learning about your reaction to that, and based on therefore the progress that you're seeking.
Thank you. And lastly, I just wanted to name, there's a bit of a conversation going on in the chat around the ATS system and AI scanners. And so this person asked, how do you even get past AI scanners to get to an actual human? And someone else had replied that, well, a recruiter had replied and a career counselor had replied that AI scanners are commonly misunderstood and don't typically work in the ways that people expect. Most of the time, there is still a human who reads your resume. Do you have anything to add or change?
Yeah, so I want to be sensitive again, like where I started. Like what I can't offer is like some how to hack your resume to get past the screener and like that's not what we do. And somebody that's in recruiting probably has perspectives about that. My understanding and my experience and then is that any AI screener, any applicant tracking system, yes, there are keywords and things that they're looking for, experience markers, things like that. And so if you're applying to a job in marketing and nowhere in your resume does the word marketing appear, like okay, that might not, bubble up to the top, right? But people are going to review it, like they're going to look through the filters, they're going to read the resumes, and a good recruiter is going to still filter, manually. Um, all I would say, our opinion on this type of question, right, is that if you take a step back for a moment, right, philosophically, we're because of these software platforms that exist, we're kind of trained to believe that we have to shape and kind of mold our resume to fit a job description. But like we talked about before, job descriptions are very poor representations of what actually happens on the job. And also, uh, when we do that mentally, what we're basically telling ourselves is that I have to fit myself to match the opening. But I would encourage you to kind of take a more introspective approach to say, how do I understand myself well enough to figure out whether that role actually fits me, right? And what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to accomplish and the progress that I need. So rather than shoving myself into various different buckets to try to fit, like your job is to actually hire a role that fits you, and you're actually doing the research and you're having the conversations and you're in interviews and you're figuring out, does this actually match what I need, right? So just to reverse the equation a bit in your mind allows you to be a bit more flexible and be more take more ownership around, like I'm not going to apply to 200 things and tweak my resume 200 times to get past the applicant tracking systems. Like, don't do that. Figure yourself out first so that you can be more confident and focused on the things that you are going to apply for.
Thank you. And one last quick question, because I think it's a really good one, is what is your advice if the dream job I want to get into is super rare and hard to come by, and I'm just stuck with all the push factors in my current role?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I would say a couple of things. One, there's no such thing as a perfect job. Like every job's going to have some trade-offs. But if there is something that you feel and genuinely and having done the work, like like this is where I need to be. It's like, okay, but I can't get it right now. That's fine. Just know that like careers are long and you can find your way there. Like as you move from progress to progress, like you can find your way there. The other thing I would say is that you don't have to be consigned to or settle yourself to like, I'm just in like the world of all these pushes. Sometimes progress can be like a one step back, two step forward type of situation. For example, like if you're completely burnt out in an environment that's not working for you, sometimes progress is just getting an easy job that pays the bills, that like is a step back on your resume. I call that a jobcation, right? A job vacation. That's progress, and that's going to help you recover, and it's going to help you refocus, regroup, have time and space to network or do the things you need to do because you didn't have it before. Like you can be more open to the notion that, okay, the dream job is still maybe a few steps away or like it hasn't opened yet, but like, what can I do about my environment now that's going to help me move forward or give me more of what I need so that I can be ready for and then prepared for that thing that I'm looking for down the line? And so progress is a constant thing that's evolving, and you don't have to just kind of be stuck in a bad situation forever until this one perfect thing opens up. Just keep moving forward, keep making progress.
Thank you. If there's any more questions, pop them in the chat, and if we have some time at the end, we can get to them.
Yeah, I know you're at the end here, so just wanted to conclude with some thoughts, which I think have come up a lot in these questions. But let's see. We've talked about figuring yourself out, right? Doing the discovery process to understand what progress means for you. And so, what are the fundamentals then of actually getting the job, right? We mentioned before, it is true. Like the majority of jobs, depending on the study you look at, are secured via networks, right? So you do need to activate yours. Be willing to reach out to people on LinkedIn and say, hey, you have a role that I've been really thinking about, would love to connect, right? Like do the work of connecting with the people that you need so to give yourself the opportunity to get in those rooms where, a role is open that you're looking for. I mentioned this before, in response to another question, but the whole point of this process is to learn before you switch versus learn by switching. Sometimes we believe that like we have to just take the job and life's experience will show us. And when I look back, I made a bunch of mistakes and I'm glad I got to where I was. And like that's all true. And experience does teach us and failures are helpful. But like we can also, in a both and scenario, we can also figure out what we're trying to do before we go and make that move and be more directed and be more focused. And so that's just the kind of our guiding philosophy is that we can get more educated and more focused about those decisions. Also mentioned this before. This isn't a game of sending out hundreds of resumes and just getting past the filters and hoping somebody gives you the interview. Like there is a numbers game to jobs. Like I get it. You do. It's not like you can send out one application and you get the hot job. Like that doesn't always happen. Sure, but narrow your focus. Like figure out more, like where your direction is leading before you go and blast the applicant portals, right? And that just allows you to be more confident when you tell your story. And we talked about not trying to fit the job description, but find a job that fits you, and that's what we're trying to help you do. How to hire a job to get the progress that you need. So all I would say is that for anyone that's in the process right now of like navigating the next thing or maybe interviews or whatever, you really need to think about it as an exercise in like discovery. And so you're asking people, and even if you're in an interview, right? Let's say you're interviewing for a role that you think that you want. The question when they say, well, any questions you have for me, right? You don't want to go in there empty-handed. You actually want to go in with questions that are basically, I've figured out my quest. I know what gives me energy. I know what my career themes are. So now the questions I have for you are, does the actual reality of this job match that? And that's really what you're doing in your head is saying, okay, well, walk me through how decisions are made here and help me understand who this person interacts with on a regular basis, or where does this person spend most of their time, right? You're trying to confirm that what this job actually is what you're looking for so that you can be level-headed and say, actually, this isn't what I need. And versus when you hear the story of this is exactly what I'm looking for, then you have exactly what you're looking for, and that's what you want to hear. Last few things are just the more you know yourself, the easier it is to tell your story and to find what you're looking for. We worked with somebody who went through Vocation and kind of decided that he was an entrepreneur and a founder before he came to us. But going through the process, realized that like teaching and impact were so incredibly important to him that what he realized was that like he was open to more things than just starting another company or going to join some startup. And so the local university posted a job posting for like an entrepreneurship director, type role within the campus. And so it didn't pay as much. It wasn't as prestigious. It wasn't a startup. But then he realized that's exactly the type of environment that I have learned about myself that I want to be in. And so when he interviewed for the job, basically what the university told him was like, you are who we're looking for. This like you're the best candidate by far. Like, and he basically got offered the job on the spot because he knew who he was and it was able to match it in that moment. And that's really what we're trying to help you do. Last thing is there is no such thing as a perfect job, which we've talked about. So don't feel like your job has to solve every push and pull for you. There might be things you need to build into your day-to-day, right? Or maybe it's a, volunteer activity, or maybe it's a, certain involvement with a certain piece in the company. Like realize that your progress can be met not only at work, but in other aspects of your life. And you can even ask your company if you're joining, like, hey, could I have one day a month to do X, Y, Z? And the answer might be sure. And that now gives you the balance that you're seeking because the job inherently doesn't offer it. And then just keep moving from progress to progress. Don't think so much about progression, the resume, and the like, again, the generic career mindset. Keep making progress, and you're going to continually find yourselves in environments where you're going to be successful. So that's it from me. Would love to hear if there's any questions. I don't know how much more time we have open, Millie, but again, if anyone wants to go through the process themselves, joinvocation.com is what we do, and would love to have you go through the process. The first step is free. You can kind of see what it's all about, and then would love to support you in any way that we can.
Thanks, Cliff. We will add all the links and including this recording to folks tomorrow. I think we've got time for one question. Um, we've got one here that says, how much would you trust AI shortlisting potential career roles for you if you have fed it your energy drainers and drivers? Is it a good initial starting point?
Um, yeah, so I mean, ultimately, like, so Vocation, what we built is an AI-driven tool, right? So we take you through a process of like a set of interviews, basically. Each one's like 20 minutes long. So we're learning a bit more about you and getting very granular so that we can then start to prototype roles together. And so, absolutely, like the reason we built Vocation is you could go to like any pick your AI model of your choice, right? And just say like, how do I love collaborating with people. What jobs should I consider? Like you're going to get some modicum of effort, but like or utility for sure, like as a starting point. The point though is just that like you need to have a much richer understanding of your context, where you are, how it all relates to your energy drivers, the trade-offs you're willing to make or not willing to make. Like it's actually a very nuanced discussion that you might not get it with a generic just chat, but certainly there's a reason that Google launched like a career gem thing. Like these things can be helpful to you for just to kind of consider and evaluate some options, but the real work is just figuring out what progress means for you.
Awesome. I think we are pretty much at time, but Cliff, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time. I have just dropped your LinkedIn, so if anyone has any further follow-up questions, they can get in touch directly with you, and we will send out this recording and all the links tomorrow. So thank you for joining, everyone, and have a wonderful evening, day, morning,
Thanks
wherever
so
you
much.
are. Thanks, Cliff.
Thanks, see y'all.
Bye-bye. Ah, happy days.